In the news this week, Mark McGowan gets top grade from a top doctor over COVID management as the border comes down and cases continue to spike.
Welcome back. Travellers return to WA as the state drops its hard border and calls for WA to commit to Ukrainian refugee intake numbers as the federal government begins to issue visas. Plus, Dr. Andrew Miller's comment.
This is The Evening News with Ivan Loom and Maliva Thorne.
Good evening. After almost 700 days of being locked inside Western Australia, the borders are down while COVID cases continue to climb to new heights. As we embrace the idea of living with COVID, Mark McGowan's leadership report card has been written and the judgment passed down is intriguing. AMA WA spokesman Dr. Andrew Miller joined me exclusively this week with his assessment. Dr. Miller, thanks for your time. If you rate the McGowan government's performance from A to F, what grade will you give on their health policies during this critical period?
Look, right at this time, I think they've earned an A for their avoidance of deaths. Certainly things could have been improved, but that is a standout by international standards. Now, we've now got to have a look at the future and work out how we're going to be successful from here.
After almost 700 days, the border has finally come down. This is something that has to happen anyway. How do you rate the government's health policy performance?
Well, the pandemic in Western Australia, the record will show that during the period of time that we controlled the border, and remembering that all other states have controlled their borders at various times, on and off, Western Australia has had 10 deaths from COVID in that entire time. Now, other places have had hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands of deaths in some countries. So Western Australia will be regarded as remarkable around the world for what it's achieved during the time of the border closures, which came at great pain and expense to a lot of people, certainly. But we will never know which people's lives were saved by that. But now we need to pivot from that border discussion into how are we going to continue to protect people who are vulnerable and the occasional person who has no risk factors from COVID, and how we're going to live with this successfully, because living with COVID doesn't mean ignoring COVID.
What are the McGowan government's hits and misses?
Well, I think the most important thing with this disease is to understand its trajectory and that it is important. Many places have missed that entirely. Places like Florida, the UK, the large parts of the US did not understand how dangerous it was. So I think that's been very good. I think they're late to the party in terms of trying to increase the staff and look after the staff in the public hospitals, and there are certainly things that can be improved there. But they're working on that now, so I think that's heading in the right direction. But I think for a very complex problem, for a very new problem, the Chief Health Officer has given excellent advice, and unlike in some states, the government have continued to listen to the Chief Health Officer. So I think they've all done a very good job.
While I still have you here, are there any concerns that have not been raised?
Well, one thing that has gone missing in action in the discussion is the long COVID complications and the desirability to avoid repeated infections, even if you've had vaccination and booster at this stage. So we still haven't written the lines for the end of the pandemic yet, but we're in a very good position to do so. And I think we can enjoy a lot of freedoms whilst keeping one eye on the fact that the fire has not yet been put out.
And Dr. Andrew Miller will have his commentary later in this program. Dr. Miller, thanks for joining us tonight.
Really good to be here. Thank you. Stay safe.
WA has started its return to pre-COVID life, with the state opening its borders to interstate and international travellers. West Australians and new visitors have been returning to WA since midnight on Thursday, as the McGowan government begins reactivating the state's tourism industry. Nelson Liu reports.
Tears of joy, smiles all round. Travellers reuniting with family, friends and loved ones, coming together again for the first time in 2 years.
We've been trying to get back more or less ever since, and now we're finally back.
It's good to be home, it's good to be home. Yeah.
WA's hard border finally came down just after midnight on Thursday, ending 700 days of travel restrictions. The state is no longer cut off from the rest of the country. Vaccinated locals and travellers now welcome back.
This is a big day for a lot of West Australians. We expect we'll see a lot of big hugs and happy tears, which is going to be great to see.
More Western Australians have begun returning to the state, and the McGowan government is hoping even more visitors will be back too, to restart tourism in WA. Interstate travellers now the target in a $12 million marketing blitz.
We turn to the rest of Australia and invite them to come and see Western Australia. It's their turn to wander out yonder.
The campaign is aimed at Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria, with advertisements featuring in newspapers and magazines, social media and radio and television between now and July. It's encouraging holiday makers to explore the state and experience WA hospitality, art and culture, and Indigenous history, supported by tourism operators.
There's a lot of support for tourism at the moment. WA is an amazing state, and I think we've sat it out a little bit, played it right, and we're ready to open.
WA is expecting an influx of people across the border, with more than 25,000 G2G passes approved for travellers in coming weeks. And with more people expected, it's hoped WA tourism will bounce back sooner than later.
That we're going to be able to get back to new normal as quickly as possible.
Nelson Liu, WAMN News.
As Russia continues its invasion into Ukraine, Ukrainians in Western Australia are urging the McGowan government to commit to a refugee intake, as the federal government prepares to receive Ukrainians affected by the bloody conflict.
A major petition pushing for special visas for those fleeing the war in Ukraine is gaining traction on change.org. Anna Frogel, the creator of this petition, joins us exclusively this week. Steve Anderson reports.
Anna, thanks for your time. Your online petition has received significant attention so far, while the federal government is starting to roll out visas for Ukrainian refugees, sending out aid as well. What are you calling for specifically in regards to the visa situation?
Look, as an Australian Ukrainian, I'm calling for Australian government to grant a special humanitarian aid intake for special refugee visas for Ukrainians suffering from the Russian aggression. It should be like a special number, allocated number, on top of humanitarian visas that are already granted. I would like to draw attention to is that visas, 200 humanitarian visas, refugee visas, 200, 201, 202, they have special condition that people should be outside their country of origin and outside Australia, which makes it impossible for Ukrainian under missile attacks to apply for these visas and actually hope for the peaceful life.
We know the situation is getting worse by the day and your family is currently fleeing. How are they doing now?
Well, until this week, they haven't even thought of leaving Zaporizhia because they thought that they are safe over there. Hours on the phone talking to them and persuading them to leave. And leaving Ukraine now is I wouldn't say an adventure, I would say it is a very, very dangerous pathway because there are evacuation trains which don't have allocated seating. People are just pushing each other to get into train.
Are you confident that your petition will ultimately be successful?
I'm very confident that Ukrainian community in Australia and the whole Australian community will support us in this petition because it is for peace. It is for people who want to get normal life, who want to become decent members of society, who want to get job and pay taxes, who want to study and make Australia flourish.
After touching down Perth this week, federal opposition leader Anthony Albanese toured a TAFE campus in Bentley before grabbing a coffee in Freo. The Labor leader visited the South Metro TAFE campus, inspecting the students' culinary skills before making an announcement concerning Labor's commitment to provide more training and university places. A federal Labor government led by Mr Albanese would give $2 million to upgrade the Bentley TAFE facility and $50 million across Australia for the TAFE Technology Fund, according to the opposition leader.
We know that TAFE is absolutely critical in our economy. It's good for people to get a trade, but it's also good for the economy. And we're seeing at the moment, one of the lessons of the pandemic are the skills shortages that we need to address.
This week on the WMN Extra News Club, we have a special wrap on Federal Labor leader Anthony Albanese's trip to Perth. We have an in-depth summary on Mr Albanese's journey as he began promoting his party's policies concerning education and job creation. We also see if his charm offensive has been effective in Western Australia, where some are still unaware of who he is. Ivan wrote a special editorial piece revealing his impression of Mr Albanese and the major challenges the leader will face before the election. You can read all that and more by subscribing to WMN Extra News Club on the link in the description and support independent journalism.
A group of homeless Indigenous people camped outside Perth CBD's Wellington Street homeless facility have received temporary accommodation as campaigners fought for them to be housed. The group will be housed in accommodation in Northbridge after spending most of the day camped in tents outside Brulu Bidimia. The group was made up of 20 unvaccinated people who had set up tents outside the building early in the morning, with many unable to secure a place in the shelter. After receiving media attention, the group was given short-term accommodation later in the afternoon.
Very unfortunate that we have to go to drastic measures to get our voices heard. As you reported earlier, we was out the front. We shouldn't have to do this.
Western Australia's first mental health transitional care unit is underway with the 40-bed service designed to assist recovery from mental illness. The project was made possible by a $7 million funding allocation to turn a former aged care facility into new units. People who are in need will be provided with transitional care and a support network to reduce the reliance on emergency departments. The government says a multidisciplinary team of mental health professionals, occupational therapists, clinical psychologists and medical professionals will provide assistance. The first 20 beds for shorter stays will be available mid this year. The other 20 beds will be open later this year.
It marks a shift away from simply treating symptoms to providing coaching to people to live their best life regardless of their mental health issues.
More than 70 sculptures are currently in display on Cottesloe Beach, marking the beginning of the Sculpture by the Sea exhibition. This year, the festival features artwork created by artists from 13 different countries, including USA, France, India, Singapore and Japan. From a brightly coloured depiction of the infinity sign to a three-headed orange creature. The variety of art pieces are certainly a feast for the eyes. Sculpture by the Sea is one of the world's largest exhibitions, with a set of interactive AFL goals expected to become one of the most popular attractions. The event is open to the public until March 21st.
So, which statue is your favourite, Ivan?
The infinity sign that looks like this Christmas candy stick colour scheme.
Oh,
red and white.
That was a nice one. I like the silver one. That looks like a drop of water almost. I think it's very eye-catching.
That on the bowl and it just splatters. What about the three-eyed one?
I have no idea what it's meant to be, but I'm sure if I go back and visit Sculptures by the Sea, I'll learn a lot more.
Worth investigating. We'll recap this week's top stories again in just a moment.
But right now, here's Nelson Liu with Western Perspective.
Thanks, Ivan and Melly. Hello, I'm Nelson Liu, and welcome to a new year of Western Perspective. Thanks for joining us. This week, he comes across as friendly, with a good sense of humour and his own charm. But do they turn Anthony Albanese into a good Prime Minister? The Labor leader has touched down in WA on the first day of quarantine-free travel in the state. But will his presence mean more votes for Labor from Western Australians? I spoke to political commentator Peter Kennedy about the opposition leader and his party's chances in the federal election.
Oh look, Mr Albanese's out to campaign as hard as he can. Hasn't been to Western Australia for quite a long time, so he's making up for lost ground. And there are some key marginal seats in play at the federal election, and he wants to win them.
How do you think his reception is going to be here?
Well, because he hasn't been in Perth for quite a while, I think a lot of people will want to see him and want to see how he's changed, if he has changed from when he was a minister before, perhaps, and a senior person in opposition. They just want to see how he's performing as opposition leader and a potential Prime Minister. I guess they want a good look at him just to see if he shapes up as a possible Prime Minister, and that could determine how they vote.
So who is Anthony Albanese, at least compared to a former leader like Bill Shorten?
Well, Mr Albanese presents as a sort of a knockabout sort of guy. A Sydney MP who's come up through the ranks, got into Parliament. He served a long time in Parliament. Got in as a very young member of Parliament. So he's there. He's been a minister, and he's an experienced politician. I guess what voters want to know is whether he's got the goods to lead the country. But he has avoided. Mr Albanese has avoided a couple of things a couple of traps that Mr Shorten fell into. Number one, Mr Shorten had a big bag of policies, some of which were unpopular and helped to be his undoing. And also, he antagonised a lot of people talking about the big end of town. You know, as if business was, there's something wrong with business, and he sort of, the big end of town is something to be feared or looked down on. But, Mr Albanese has been careful to avoid that. So from that point of view, he's campaigned quite shrewdly.
As of a few days ago, his approval rating is practically neck and neck with Scott Morrison with a Labor lead. Does he have the strength to hold up in the upcoming election?
That'll be the challenge. That'll be the challenge for Mr Albanese when Mr Morrison gets onto the campaign trail. Mr Morrison is a proven campaigner. He showed that 3 years ago when he out-campaigned Bill Shorten in the election campaign. The challenge for Mr Morrison is to repeat that this time round. If he can, he could get the Liberal Party back into a position where it's neck and neck. But at the moment, of course, Labor has a very useful lead.
Him being here in WA, how will his relationship with Mark McGowan help his campaign?
I think Mr Albanese will be hoping that some of Mr McGowan's magic will rub off on him. You know, Mr McGowan had an extraordinary win in the state election just 12 months ago. Extraordinary. And Mr Albanese will be hoping that sort of being seen with Mr McGowan and some of that popularity that Mr McGowan built up at the state level will rub off on Labor at the federal level. That's the challenge. It didn't work for Labor 3 years ago, but Labor, and particularly Mr Albanese, will be hoping it'll work this time.
And finally, what does Anthony Albanese have to do to win this election?
Well, look, I think he has to put up a plausible set of policies for Australians to vote for, and that to show he has a vision for the country. Very, very important in very, very uncertain times. So he's got to show that, number one, the policies are right, the vision is right, and that people can trust him to lead the country. And he'd do that better than Mr Morrison. If he can do that, then he could well win the election.
And now, here's AMA WA spokesman Dr Andrew Miller with his weekly COVID-19 update and commentary.
Hi, thanks for your time. Australia continues to be a tale of two different countries, really, with the map of the pandemic now that Western Australia is starting to see in the thousands of cases per day. Whilst over east, they're still getting significant numbers, but considering themselves to be a bit beyond it and dropping their restrictions. So we're about to find out over there how much of their protection, their flattening of the curve, if you like, has been due to things like masking, crowd limits, social distancing, and how much of it is due to high booster vaccination levels. Of course, in Western Australia, we started our Omicron wave with a much higher third dose level, fortunately, and therefore we can expect to see pretty fresh immunity helping to protect us here. And we've also been really good in WA at complying with masking and so on. So as those restrictions tighten a bit, we would expect to see the case numbers here not rise as quickly, hopefully not getting to the projected 9,000 or 10,000 cases a day, but stopping short of that. And our Achilles heel remains, of course, the schools. And we're seeing a lot of school transmission, very concerning that a lot of unvaccinated kids are potentially being infected. And I would have sympathy for parents in wanting to be conservative about avoiding those infections if possible until their child's had a chance to be vaccinated, given that we don't know really too much about the long-term consequences of long COVID which we're seeing as an increasing problem overseas. Certainly the Italians, the Americans reporting that very strongly. These problems with COVID over East amplified now, of course, with the terrible flooding that we're seeing there. And our heart goes out to people who have relatives or who are mixed up in that situation, remembering that always worsens public health situations because it's very difficult for people then to be able to not only avoid catching COVID in the first place, but potentially getting the treatments that they need. Speaking of treatments, we now have approved antivirals for people over the age of 65, and people who have symptoms should certainly be getting tested very quickly. And if you're in that age group, and finding out whether you're eligible to have early intervention treatment, particularly if you have other underlying diseases. There's been some commentary, including from Nobel Prize winner Professor Peter Doherty, that Shane Warne's unfortunate demise has come at a time when he was in the post-COVID phase, and although we have no idea really what his personal circumstance was, there is very solid evidence published in Nature that in the year after having had COVID, we're 10 to 12 times more likely to have a heart attack or a stroke than we would have before that. So if you have other risk factors such as lifestyle things or family history, then that is a risky time. And we need to take that seriously. We don't need to panic about it, as with all of these things, but we do need to be informed and armed with the science so that we can deal with things realistically rather than pretending that they're not happening. So stay safe out there. Masks are still the most important thing that we have. A well-fitted mask, an N95 or P2 mask, they're getting to be widely available in the community now. Wear those whenever you're in the company of others. I'm now wearing clear, very stylish looking goggles when I go out to the supermarket and so on, and it doesn't seem to upset anybody. Also protects from any aerosols getting into the eyes, but most importantly, a well-fitted face mask for yourself and also your children when you're in crowded public places indoors. Very important. Thanks for your time.
And that's WP for this week. We'll be back again next time, but for now, it's back to you, Ivan and Melly.
Thanks, Nelson. And now, here is Leo with what's coming up on 6 News tonight.
Thanks, guys. Today on 6 News, breaking news. Vladimir Putin warns the worst is yet to come amid a noticeable escalation in the Russia-Ukraine war over recent days. Plus, tributes continue to flow in from across Australia and around the world for cricketer legend Shane Warne, dead at the age of 52. And wet weather conditions ease in Queensland, where the state's southeast continues the clean-up. But over in New South Wales, rain is expected in the next few days amid devastation in Lismore. You can see full details on those stories and plenty more by heading to our YouTube channel. Just search 6 News Australia to find us, or head to our website 6newsau.com. For now though, guys, it's back to you.
Thanks, Leo. And that's our weekly news and current affairs. We had the latest news on our website, wmnnews.com.au.
From Melly and myself, we wish you good health, good night. See you next Sunday.
Thanks for watching.